They thought a prenuptial agreement was enough to leash a wolf in sheep's clothing. They were entirely wrong. When you are caged by a dynasty that treats cruelty as a privilege of the elite, you do not cry, and you never beg for pity. Instead, you smile, brew them a perfect cup of tea, and silently buy the very foundation beneath their feet. The Whitmore family stole 3 years of my youth. In return, I took their entire lives. Hello, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will not be uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story captivating, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, significantly longer, and packed with detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, all fully produced with multiple emotional voices in a single story. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, where you will meet a woman named Kayla Warren. I am 32 years old, and in the corporate world, they call me a senior cybersecurity architect and a forensic financial data investigator. But in the grand, suffocating halls of the Whitmore estate, I was simply referred to as Preston's unfortunate mistake. Preston Whitmore was my husband. To the public, he was a charismatic tech entrepreneur, a handsome pioneer of the digital age. Behind closed doors, he was nothing more than a well-dressed intellectual property thief. He built his entire reputation by cannibalizing the brilliance of underpaid developers, slapping his famous last name on their sleepless nights, and discarding them when they asked for their rightful equity. We lived in Silver Creek Valley, California. It is a place where old money and new tech money bleed together to form an impenetrable fortress of wealth. Here, the Whitmore family reigned as uncrowned royalty. Their empire, Apex Stratus Holdings, was a colossal real estate technology conglomerate that monopolized everything it touched. The estate itself was an architectural monstrosity of imported Italian marble and towering glass walls that consumed thousands of gallons of water during severe droughts. It was a physical manifestation of their arrogance. At the very top of this gilded food chain sat Arthur Whitmore, my father-in-law. Arthur was a dictatorial, arrogant patriarch who firmly believed that the law was just a minor inconvenience for people with less than 9 figures in their bank accounts. He ruled his family and his company with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of corporate philanthropy. "Ethics are for the poor, Preston," he would often say over dinner, slicing into a rare steak. "We do not follow the rules. We write them, and then we charge admission." Next to him stood the golden child, his daughter Caroline. Just last month, Forbes magazine had crowned her the visionary female CEO of the decade. They praised her innovative leadership, completely blind to the fact that her true talent lay in smiling for cameras, while ruthlessly gutting the pensions of her own employees. Her magazine cover was framed in the grand foyer, a daily reminder of her supposed superiority. To Arthur and the rest of the Whitmore clan, I was a glaring stain on their immaculate social fabric. I did not come from a lineage of hedge fund managers or state senators. I grew up in the foster care system, an orphan who clawed her way to a full Ivy League scholarship through sheer, unrelenting willpower. I had no trust fund. I had no family name to shield me. To them, my presence was an insult to their carefully curated bloodline, a pedestrian intrusion into their aristocratic reality. This disdain was never hidden. It was put on spectacular display during their extravagant high society galas. At these parties, hundreds of the wealthiest parasites in California would gather in our grand ballroom, and I was consistently positioned as the dark, dull backdrop required to make their glittering lives shine brighter. Arthur would purposely introduce me to prominent politicians by saying, "This is Preston's wife. She works with computers," or something quaint like that. "We love a charity case." The wives of venture capitalists would corner me by the champagne towers. "Oh, Kayla, "It is so brave of you to wear something off the rack," they would say, their voices dripping with sugary venom. Caroline would inevitably chime in, swirling her $1,000 glass of wine. "Preston has such a big heart, adopting stray dogs and people alike." They expected me to break. They wanted me to cry, to lash out, to show the raw, unrefined emotion of the lower classes they so deeply despised. They wanted a reaction so they could finally point their manicured fingers and say, "Look, we told you she does not belong here." But I never gave them the satisfaction. Instead of fighting back, I chose absolute silence. I shrank into the background, blending into the expensive silk drapery like a ghost haunting a golden castle. I poured their wine. I smiled politely at their thinly veiled insults. I played the role of the submissive, intimidated outsider perfectly. The wealthy mistake silence for stupidity. They assume that if you are not screaming for attention, you must have nothing of value to say. Because what the Whitmore family did not understand was that when you force a data investigator into the shadows, you are simply giving her the perfect vantage point, while they were busy clinking their crystal glasses and congratulating themselves on their inherent superiority. I was watching. I watched the nervous twitch in Arthur's jaw when a certain offshore bank was mentioned. I noticed Caroline excessively drinking clear spirits while aggressively whispering to her chief financial officer in the secluded garden. I observed every single crack in the foundation of their empire, mapping out the structural weaknesses of a family that believed they were too big to fail. I was not surviving their abuse. I was studying it. The public facade of Apex Stratos Holdings was a masterclass in corporate illusion. If you read the glowing profiles in financial magazines, you would think the company was a monolithic fortress of innovation, an unstoppable force printing money through revolutionary real estate technology. But algorithms and data do not lie, even when chief executive officers do. Behind the multi-million-dollar public relations campaigns and the aggressive stock buybacks, the empire was actively bleeding to death. Caroline Whitmore, the so-called visionary of our decade, was entirely responsible for this arterial spray of capital. Her strategy consisted of delusional investments disguised as aggressive expansion. She had recently poured over $150 million into an augmented reality property viewing platform that collapsed within 8 months, alongside a disastrous acquisition of a commercial zoning algorithm that turned out to be completely non-functional to the outside world. She was a genius pushing boundaries. Internally, the company was drowning in toxic assets, plummeting profit margins, and a culture of desperate, systemic corruption directly orchestrated by Caroline to keep the stock price artificially inflated. They assumed I was just a decorative housewife, too busy organizing charity galas and picking out floral arrangements to understand the complexities of their business. They forgot, or simply never cared to learn, that my specialty was dismantling secure networks and tracing hidden financial architecture. I did not need to break into their corporate headquarters to find their secrets. I just needed my husband to take a shower. Preston was remarkably careless. He viewed cybersecurity as something for the IT department to worry about, not a brilliant founder like himself. One evening, while he was in the master bathroom, humming a tune with the water running, he left his heavily encrypted company laptop open on our bed. It took me exactly 3 minutes and 45 seconds to act. Using a customized flash drive I had disguised as a luxury brand lip gloss, I bypassed his biometric locks and deployed a highly sophisticated polymorphic tracking code directly into the Apex Stratos internal network. I designed the malware to be entirely invisible. It did not steal large batches of data that would trip their alarms. Instead, it operated like a digital parasite, passively mirroring keystrokes, intercepting internal memorandums, and quietly duplicating administrative access tokens. It was a backdoor left wide open, streaming a continuous, encrypted feed of their most classified financial ledgers straight to an untraceable server I had set up under a fictitious identity. Once the data began pouring in, I spent my nights sifting through the digital wreckage of their empire. The discrepancy did not take long to find. There was a massive, gaping hole between their internal cash flow statements and the sanitized quarterly reports they were filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Caroline was hiding a catastrophic operating loss of nearly $300 million. If the market regulators or the shareholders found out, the company's stock would plummet overnight, triggering a catastrophic sell-off. But Caroline had found a way to plug the hole, at least temporarily. She needed an immediate injection of liquid capital to create a shadow slush fund, a massive pool of untraceable money to cover the margins and falsify their revenue streams. To get that kind of cash without alerting the board of directors, she needed collateral, and she used the only asset massive enough and privately held enough to secure a shadow loan of that magnitude. She had secretly mortgaged the ancestral Silver Creek estate, the very foundation of the Whitmore legacy. The sprawling, unencumbered fortress of Italian marble and pristine acreage that the family had flaunted for generations was now leveraged to the hilt. She had taken out an extreme high-interest mezzanine debt facility from a predatory offshore lending syndicate. The terms were absolutely suicidal. The covenants were so strict that a single missed payment, or even a minor downgrade in the corporate credit rating of Apex Stratos, would trigger an immediate, non-negotiable default. The supreme irony was that Arthur Whitmore was completely oblivious to his daughter's financial treason. He had no idea that the ground beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes no longer belonged to him. Just a week after I uncovered the documents, Arthur hosted a private dinner for several prominent state senators and a local Supreme Court judge. I stood quietly in the corner, holding a tray of appetizers, watching him point out the floor-to-ceiling windows toward the sprawling manicured lawns. "The beauty of this estate," Arthur boasted, swirling a glass of 50-year-old scotch, "is that it represents absolute permanence. We own the earth beneath our feet, while other corporations borrow and beg. The Whitmore name is anchored in solid, unyielding equity. This house is our ultimate leverage. No one can ever take this away from us." He used the estate as a psychological weapon, a tool to intimidate local politicians and demonstrate that he was untouchable. And there I stood, looking at this arrogant patriarch, knowing that his beloved golden child had already signed the execution order for his kingdom. Looking at the heavily encrypted ledgers glowing on my hidden monitor later that night, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I finally saw the complete picture. The entire Whitmore empire was not a fortress. It was a fragile house of cards balancing on a ticking liquidity time bomb. Their arrogance was so blinding that they had built their own trap and walked right into it. I smiled to myself in the dark. I realized then that I did not need to find a knife to destroy this family. I did not need to orchestrate a scandal or scream to the press. The house was already on fire. All I had to do was quietly walk to the perimeter, slide the deadbolts into place, and lock every single exit. The illusion of my marriage finally shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I had returned early from a specialized cybersecurity conference in Seattle, driving straight to our private coastal penthouse in Malibu. I expected the quiet hum of the ocean breeze and a few days of peace. Instead, I was greeted by the suffocating stench of spilled vintage champagne and stale arrogance. I walked into the master suite to find Preston entangled in our imported silk sheets with a woman I immediately recognized from my social media feed. She was a digital fitness instructor, famous for her heavily filtered workout videos, and her audience of over 4 million followers. They were not even asleep. The room was an absolute wreckage of illicit substances, designer clothing, and broken glass. When Preston saw me standing in the doorway, he did not scramble to cover himself. He did not stutter in a panic, and he certainly did not offer an apology. He simply let out a breathless, mocking laugh. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, wrapped a towel around his waist, and walked over to the mahogany wall safe in the corner of the room. He punched in a 6-digit code, pulled out a thick leather-bound document, and tossed it directly at my chest. It hit the floor with a heavy, insulting thud. It was our prenuptial agreement, exactly 120 pages of airtight legal jargon specifically engineered to ensure I owned absolutely nothing. Do not look so incredibly dramatic, Kayla, Preston sneered, pouring himself a fresh drink as if I were a mildly annoying room service attendant. You knew exactly what this was when you married me. You get the clothes on your back and the privilege of keeping my last name on your resume. If you breathe a single word of this to the press, or if you even think about filing for a messy public divorce, I will make sure you end up exactly where I found you, in the gutter. The betrayal was sharp, but the true, calculated cruelty came the very next morning. The Whitmore family machinery moved with terrifying speed to protect their golden boy. I was summoned to Arthur's private study, not for an explanation, but for an execution. Arthur sat behind his massive oak desk, flanked by three of his most vicious corporate attorneys, men who charged thousands of dollars an hour simply to ruin lives. "You are going to sign a separation agreement right now," Arthur commanded, his voice dripping with absolute, unadulterated contempt. "You will walk away quietly. You will ask for nothing if you attempt to negotiate, or if you dare to frame my son as the villain in this pedestrian little drama. My legal team will completely obliterate you. I will personally blacklist you from every technology and financial firm within the borders of the United States. You will never write another line of code. You will never investigate another data leak. I will ensure you cannot even secure a job scanning barcodes at a local grocery store." They stared at me with predatory anticipation. They wanted the emotional breakdown. They expected me to collapse onto the imported Persian rug, weeping uncontrollably, begging for a fraction of my dignity or a meager financial settlement to survive. I did not shed a single tear. My heart beat at a steady, perfectly rhythmic pace. The burning sensation of rage that should have consumed me was instantly compressed, hardened by 3 years of surviving their psychological warfare. Until it transformed into something completely different. It became a pure, glacial, and terrifyingly calm rationality. I picked up the solid gold fountain pen from his desk. Without uttering a single syllable, I signed my name on the dotted line of their aggressive separation agreement. I handed the document back to Arthur, met his cold, triumphant gaze with an entirely blank stare, and walked out of the estate for the very last time. By nightfall, I had relocated to a decaying $45 a night motel on the industrial outskirts of the city. The wallpaper was peeling in thick strips, and the neon vacancy sign outside buzzed with a relentless, annoying hum. I sat at the chipped laminate desk, opened my heavily modified laptop, and connected to a deeply encrypted offshore server. It was time to resurrect a phantom. 5 years ago, long before I ever met Preston Whitmore, I had established a covert, independent financial intelligence consulting firm under a meticulously crafted alias. I called it Vanguard Nexus Group, to the global market. Vanguard Nexus was a shadowy, elite syndicate known for executing hostile corporate takeovers, managing distressed debt, and conducting ruthless corporate espionage on behalf of anonymous billionaires. In reality, it was just me, operating behind 7 impenetrable layers of proxy servers and untraceable shell companies located in foreign jurisdictions that flatly refused to cooperate with American authorities. I stared at the blinking cursor on the glowing screen. The Whitmores thought they had just exiled a helpless, penniless victim. They believed that taking away my platinum credit cards and threatening my professional career was their ultimate victory. But fighting for a few $1,000,000 in alimony was far too cheap. Too common. A divorce settlement was a simple transaction. What I wanted was a total financial massacre. I typed in the 72-character master passphrase. The command dashboard of Vanguard Nexus Group illuminated my face in the dim, dingy motel room. I was no longer the disgraced, invisible wife. I was the architect of their impending doom. My objective was no longer personal survival. My sole purpose was the complete, categorical erasure of the Whitmore name from the map of the elite world. The execution of a hostile corporate siege does not happen with loud explosions or shattered glass. It happens in the absolute silence of fiber optic cables and encrypted offshore servers. Sitting in that decaying motel room, listening to the relentless hum of the neon sign outside, I began the systematic dismantling of the Apex Stratus Holdings empire. It was a game of Go, played on a global financial board, and I was placing black stones around their white pieces until there was absolutely no room left for them to breathe. My first move was to weaponize their own toxic debt against them. Because Caroline had drained the company's liquid assets for her delusional technology ventures, Apex Stratos had been forced to issue massive amounts of high-yield corporate bonds to keep their daily operations running. In the financial sector, these are politely referred to as distressed securities, but the reality is they are junk bonds. They are desperate IOUs sold to aggressive investors with the promise of high interest rates. Operating through Vanguard Nexus Group, I deployed a labyrinth of anonymous shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and the British Virgin Islands. Over the course of 3 weeks, these phantom entities began quietly purchasing every single piece of bad debt and unsecured bond associated with Apex Stratos that hit the secondary market. I bought them for pennies on the dollar from nervous institutional investors who were eager to offload the risk. I did not make one massive purchase that would trigger an alarm with the regulatory agencies. Instead, I executed thousands of microtransactions, a relentless, invisible swarm of acquisitions. By the end of the month, my covert syndicate had become the undisputed majority debt holder of their entire corporate structure. The Whitmore family thought they answered only to themselves, but legally, they now owed their very existence to a faceless conglomerate that I controlled. With the financial perimeter secured, I moved to the psychological warfare phase. Owning their debt was merely the foundation. I needed to sever the head of the snake from the inside. I took the massive trove of encrypted data I had harvested from my ex-husband's laptop and compiled a devastating, irrefutable dossier. It contained hundreds of pages of raw server logs, unredacted internal communications, and falsified revenue streams that explicitly detailed Caroline's systemic fraud and her shadow slush fund. But I did not leak this to the press. A media scandal would give them time to hire crisis managers and spin the narrative. Instead, I surgically targeted 3 independent members of the Apex Stratos Board of Directors. These were wealthy, cautious men who served on the audit committee. They had a strict fiduciary duty to the shareholders, and more importantly, they possessed a profound, paralyzing fear of federal prison. Using an untraceable, encrypted network, I sent the dossier directly to their private email addresses simultaneously at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. I included a simple, anonymous message. The Securities and Exchange Commission will receive this exact file in 72 hours. Secure your own liabilities. The resulting panic was a masterpiece of corporate paranoia. Through my backdoor access to their servers, I watched the digital chaos unfold. Emergency video conferences were scheduled in the middle of the night. Frantic, heavily redacted emails flew between the board members and their outside legal counsel. They were terrified. They could not publicly confront Caroline without instantly crashing the stock price, but they could not ignore the evidence without making themselves accomplices to a massive federal crime. I had trapped them in a regulatory nightmare, sowing the seeds of a violent internal coup. While the boardroom was silently tearing itself apart, the final, fatal piece of the puzzle fell perfectly into place. The global market, in its cold and unpredictable nature, experienced a sudden fluctuation. The central bank raised interest rates by a mere 0.25%. For normal people, this meant slightly higher credit card bills. For Caroline Whitmore, it triggered a catastrophic margin call on the extreme. High-interest mezzanine loans she had secretly taken out against the Silver Creek estate. The offshore lending syndicate that held the mortgage immediately demanded a capital injection of $40 million within 48 hours to balance the loan-to-value ratio. Caroline, whose slush fund was completely depleted, could not produce the cash. The second the deadline expired, the mortgage hit a technical default. The ancestral home of the Whitmore dynasty, the ultimate symbol of their untouchable power, was officially subject to immediate foreclosure. The offshore lenders wanted to liquidate the asset as fast as possible to avoid getting tangled in a messy American bankruptcy court. Vanguard Nexus was waiting right at the door. I wired the funds through a Swiss holding account, offering to buy the entire foreclosure portfolio in pure, liquid cash at a premium. The syndicate accepted without hesitation. In less than 24 hours, the transaction cleared the central banking authorities. I did not just own their company's debt. I now held the exclusive, unencumbered deed to the ground beneath Arthur Whitmore's feet. But taking their home was not enough to satisfy the debt they owed me for 3 years of psychological torment. I needed to completely desecrate their legacy. Within hours of securing the deed, my proxy legal team filed emergency, expedited paperwork with the County Zoning Commission. We utilized a little-known environmental redevelopment loophole to forcefully change the land use designation of the Silver Creek estate. I was not going to sell the mansion to another billionaire. I had the property legally rezoned to become a high-capacity, heavy industrial electronic waste processing complex. The grand ballroom where they had mocked my origins, the pristine gardens where they had plotted their corporate crimes, were all scheduled to be bulldozed and replaced with toxic battery recycling vats and scrap metal crushers. The trap was now fully armed, and every single exit was welded shut. Yet, in the absolute darkness of their impending doom, the Whitmore family remained blissfully blind. Through a compromised microphone on Preston's smartwatch, I listened to them that evening. They were gathered in the grand dining room of the estate, the very house they no longer owned, clinking glasses of vintage champagne. They were celebrating my departure. "To Preston, for finally cutting off the dead weight," Arthur toasted, his voice echoing with that familiar, sickening arrogance. "She is probably sleeping in her car by now," Caroline laughed, the sound sharp and entirely devoid of empathy. They were so intoxicated by their own perceived invincibility, so utterly consumed by the illusion of their superiority, that they could not feel the vacuum forming around them. They were breathing in deeply, toasting to their victory, completely unaware that their oxygen supply had already been entirely cut off. It was a Thursday morning when the legal severance of my nightmarish marriage finally became official. The family court chamber was aggressively sterile, a fitting environment for the death of a lie. Preston arrived exactly 22 minutes late. He strolled through the swinging wooden doors wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit, a platinum chronograph watch gleaming heavily on his wrist, and radiating that signature, suffocating arrogance that I had endured for 36 months. He did not even bother to look in my direction. He simply flashed a self-satisfied, half-smirk at his aggressively expensive legal counsel and impatiently tapped his gold designer pen against the solid mahogany table. He scribbled his signature on the final decree with reckless, theatrical speed. To Preston, this was not a solemn legal proceeding. He had a first-class flight to catch to Cabo San Lucas at 2 o'clock that afternoon with his fitness influencer mistress. The burden of legally discarding his wife was merely a minor administrative delay in his luxurious, consequence-free itinerary. The hearing concluded in less than 15 minutes. I walked out through the heavy brass double doors and stepped into the blinding, oppressive midday sun of the city. I fully intended to hail a cheap taxi back to my decaying motel and watch the imminent financial fireworks from a comfortable, anonymous distance. But Arthur Whitmore was not a man who allowed his victims to simply walk away in peace. He demanded absolute, theatrical destruction. As I descended the sweeping marble steps of the courthouse, a solid wall of broad-shouldered bodyguards in matching dark suits suddenly materialized. They moved in perfect synchronization, physically blocking my path to the street and trapping me on the landing. Arthur stepped out from behind his wall of hired muscle. He had orchestrated a public execution. To my immediate left, I heard the rapid, aggressive clicking of camera shutters. He had actually called the local tabloid paparazzi, tipping off the bottom-feeding photographers just to ensure my humiliation was permanently documented and splashed across the social pages. Arthur marched directly into my personal space. His face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, swollen with tyrannical rage. He raised a rigid, trembling finger, pointing at mere inches from my nose. "You actually thought you could infiltrate my bloodline and walk away with a piece of my empire," Arthur roared, his voice echoing loudly against the concrete pillars, making sure the cameras caught every single syllable. "You are nothing but a cheap, pathetic parasite, a gutter rat who tried to wear a diamond collar. You will never amount to anything, and I swear to you right now, if you ever dare to even look in the direction of the Silver Creek estate again, I will have my security drag you away in chains. You are permanently banned from my sight." Standing a few feet behind him, Preston and Caroline were absolutely reveling in the spectacle. Caroline leaned casually against the stone railing, failing to hide a vicious, predatory smile behind her oversized designer sunglasses. Preston chuckled softly, checking his watch again. Completely unbothered by his father's public volatility, they were drinking in the sight of the woman they despised being pushed down into the mud for the very last time. They fully expected the cameras to capture a broken, weeping woman, a fragile creature completely shattered by the sheer gravity of their wealth and power. They were fundamentally disappointed. I did not give them a single tear. I did not flinch. I did not frown. And I certainly did not yell back to defend myself. The silence that fell over me was absolute, heavy, and terrifyingly calm. I stood perfectly straight, squaring my shoulders against the warm wind. I slowly and deliberately smoothed the lapel of my inexpensive trench coat. I raised my chin and locked my eyes directly onto Arthur's flushed face. I looked at him not as a powerful, intimidating patriarch, but as a hollow, dried-up corpse that just had not realized its own heart had stopped beating yet. The absolute lack of fear in my eyes caused Arthur's furious expression to falter for a fraction of a second. A brief flicker of genuine confusion crossed his arrogant features. In that beautiful, suspended moment of tension, I slowly reached my right hand into the deep pocket of my coat. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal chassis of a secondary, untraceable smartphone. I pulled it out, keeping my dead, unblinking gaze anchored entirely on Arthur. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen, resting gently on a single, pre-programmed execution command interface. It was the master switch, linked directly to the automated systems of Vanguard Nexus Group. With a slow, almost imperceptible smile, I pressed send. The 3-year-old bomb had just been triggered. The second my thumb lifted from the screen, the digital confirmation illuminated my face. I slowly rotated my wrist, turning the glowing display outward so it was directly in Arthur Whitmore's line of sight. It was an emergency. Supreme Court authorized writ of eviction for the Silver Creek estate, right at the top, in bold, undeniable black lettering. It listed the sole, unencumbered owner of the property, Kayla Warren. Arthur squinted against the glare of the sun, his brain violently rejecting the words his eyes were processing. He opened his mouth to scream another insult, but he never got the chance. His suit pocket began to vibrate aggressively. Then, a loud, obnoxious custom ringtone pierced the tense air on the courthouse steps. Still glaring at me, Arthur reached into his jacket and answered the call, angrily pressing the phone to his ear. He did not even have time to say hello. Through the receiver, even from 3 feet away, I could hear the hysterical, hyperventilating shrieks of his golden child. Caroline was screaming so loudly and with such absolute terror that Arthur instinctively pulled the phone away from his head, accidentally activating the speaker function. "They are taking everything," Caroline wailed, her voice cracking in a pitch of pure, unadulterated panic. "The board of directors just ambushed me in the main conference room. They staged an emergency coup. They fired me on the spot. Dad, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is here. They are physically sealing my computers and carrying boxes out of the lobby. They are charging me with federal wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement." Arthur froze. The blood drained from his face so fast, it looked as if he had been physically struck. "Caroline, calm down," he choked out, his voice trembling for the first time in his miserable life. "Who is behind this? We will call the legal team. We will crush them." "There is no legal team," Caroline shrieked, sobbing uncontrollably into the speaker. "The legal team quit the holding company that just executed a hostile takeover of the entire Apex Stratus board, the people who just bought out our debt and ordered the federal audit. It is Vanguard Nexus Group Dad. It is her. The chief executive officer of Vanguard is Kayla Warren owns everything. The silence that fell over the marble steps was absolute, broken only by the sound of the paparazzi furiously clicking their cameras, capturing the exact second the mighty Whitmore dynasty evaporated. Arthur's eyes darted from his phone back to my face. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The supreme arrogance that had defined his entire existence shattered into a million irreparable pieces of absolute horror. His complexion turned a sickening shade of gray. His knees, unable to support the sudden, crushing weight of his monumental failure, simply gave out. The great, dictatorial Arthur Whitmore collapsed onto the hard concrete of the courthouse steps, gasping for air like a dying fish. Behind him, Preston dropped his designer sunglasses. His jaw hung open in pathetic disbelief. The man who had mocked me, who had thrown a prenuptial agreement in my face just days ago, suddenly lunged forward. He fell to his knees right next to his father, reaching out with trembling hands to grab the hem of my inexpensive trench coat. "Kayla, please," Preston stammered, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "We can fix this. I am so sorry. I will leave her. I will block her number right now. We are still a family. You do not have to do this. Have mercy on us." I looked down at the two men groveling at my feet. I did not feel pity, and I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but the clean, sterile satisfaction of a perfectly executed algorithm. I gently kicked my foot back, forcing Preston to release my coat. I offered them both a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Mercy is a luxury for the rich. Preston," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the chaotic noise of the street. "And as of 2 minutes ago, you are completely bankrupt. Oh, and Arthur, make sure you pack your bags tonight. The heavy demolition excavators are scheduled to arrive at your front gates at exactly 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and they have strict orders to level the property to the dirt." I turned my back on the ruins of their family and walked away, disappearing into the crowded city streets, leaving them to face the blinding flashes of the cameras entirely alone. Their downfall was absolute and occurred with breathtaking speed. Within 48 hours, the Whitmore name became a toxic punchline in the financial world. The elite high society that once drank their expensive wine instantly turned their backs, blacklisting them from every country club and charity board in the state. Stripped of all their assets, their bank accounts frozen by federal prosecutors, Arthur and Caroline were forced to relocate into a cramped public housing unit on the undesirable side of the city. As for Preston, his loyalty proved as fragile as his wealth. The moment the news broke, his fitness influencer mistress raided his remaining personal safe, stole all of his expensive Rolex watches, and vanished completely without a trace. Today, I stand in the executive glass-walled office at the very top of the newly rebranded Vanguard Nexus Group Tower. I am currently restructuring the liquidated assets of Apex Stratos, channeling millions of dollars into a massive scholarship fund designed exclusively to support young, brilliant female engineers who come from impoverished backgrounds. I am building an army of women who know how to survive. If there is one thing you must learn from my story, let it be this: never waste a single tear on the people who try to trample you. Crying is a biological surrender. True power does not lie in screaming the loudest, throwing tantrums, or aggressively showing off your wealth to intimidate others. True, unstoppable power is the ability to silently fade into the background, quietly hold the debts and secrets of your enemies, and strike a single, fatal blow while they are sleeping peacefully in the illusion of their own supremacy. Thank you so much, from the bottom of my heart, for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments. As I mentioned earlier, our channel will unfortunately not be uploading new videos on YouTube in the near future, and we are transitioning to operate exclusively on Patreon. If you found today's story captivating, please help us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to the absolute best, incredibly long, and exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Thank you again, and take care.